I'm really delighted to be able to present Rob Lewis today. There's a wonderful blurb that was written on the back of his book, The Silence of Vanishing Things. And I did an interview with Rob about this book, and I'll put a link in the chat. But Jan Zwicki is the one who connected Rob Lewis and I, which I think is fantastic. Here is a brilliant poet living on an island in the Salish Sea who connects me with a poet who lives much closer to me than she does. And she said, although most of us acknowledge intellectually that a planetary ecological collapse is underway, many of us do not engage emotionally. Rob Lewis is here to change that. He listens with the ear of the heart to the disappearing voices of the natural world. There is sorrow in these poems and essays, but there's even more joy. At once passionately political and deeply wise, this is work that aims to heal what has gone missing in humans themselves. The words of Jan Zwicki. In the bio for Rob Lewis is a poet, activist, house painter, and musician. His writings have been published in Dark Mountain, Manzanita, the Atlanta Review, Southern Review, and other journals. As owner of Earth Craft Painting, he also works to revive the use of local wild clays to paint our work and living spaces. And I've seen some of that work, and it's absolutely brilliant. He takes that same care with language and with poetry. And he's become not only friend, but really kind of a spiritual poetry brother. I think people who would go out in a kayak to become a kayaktivist and protest what oil companies continue to be allowed to do in the destabilization of the very ecosystem which sustains us, to have that kind of courage, and not only to have it on the water, but to have it in language and to put out beautiful books like The Silence of Vanishing Things, gives you a sense of who this person is and what his character is. So I encourage you to give him your full attention for this time and to appreciate the experience we're about to have. So please welcome my spiritual brother, my poetry brother, Rob Lewis.
Thank you, Paul, for that wonderful introduction. Yes, spiritual brothers and poetry brothers indeed. And I'm glad you brought up the kayaktivism, because Herb Goodwin, who is also here, was the guy who got me out on the kayaks. So, you know, it takes a village to take down an oil company, I guess, and we're still at it. And thank you, Andrew. It's been a delight to work for you in getting ready for this. I really appreciate your help and just your very peaceful and gentle way of helping me get ready. It's been great, and I'm glad to see you all. You know, peace is something we seem to kind of associate with the peace movement, which we kind of associate with something being behind us. And I think we're about to all get caught up in peace again, because things are not going well. But I haven't really written about that. Instead, I kind of see peace through nature. I see nature as kind of the physical embodiment of peace. And I really worry that as we lose nature in the world, we lose our own ability to resonate with real peace, and peace becomes more of a concept. So that's kind of where I focused in picking out writings. So I'll be reading a couple short poems, a little bit of a longer poem, and then I wrote a poem for this reading in the form that Paul Nelson has taught me, which is the serial poem, in which you start a poem and you kind of let the poem write itself. You bring all your attention to the poem, but you don't have specific ideas about where you're going or where it's going to end. And you just follow it till you feel like the energy is done and you've completed the poem. So that's what I did. That'll be the last poem I read. So this first poem is called A Little Faith. I have faith in the moon that it will never turn its face against me or away for long. I have faith in the unscheduled itineraries of rain and what moves from word to word as I try to transcribe the stone's sermon. I trust the mountain ash outside my trailer to never try and convince me of anything other than its generosity. I trust the example of the heron that stares eternity in the eyes and has faith enough to not need to know. And this poem is called Bay in Winter. Bay in winter, level and sustained the clear mined water, dotted with loons and mergansers, pulling distinguished wakes, drawn in silver by the metal sun. I don't need to know what to do with my life, but I do need to live its details, to reciprocate and be tuned. And this poem is called The Death of Efficiency. Efficiency may not seem like a subject having to do with peace, but I think the whole efficiency paradigm that we all have to be faster and more efficient every single day is partly what's driving all this madness and drives us to war. Certainly drives the whole military industrial complex. So this is my poem about the death of efficiency. The death of efficiency. 1. Yes, he's had quite a run, and he thinks he's just getting started. Soon I won't need hands, he cries, or even wires. Remember cable? He chuckles, looking up through the cool blue physics for somewhere Mars, icy, radioactive Mars, like it were a lover, an ice cream sundae, a final equation. You're dying, I say. It's natural. Things run their course. You've run yours. He turns toward me, eyes narrowing on streams of digits. I own you, he says, clunky little craftsman with your slow-toed hands. I own more than you. I own your dreams. The whole apparatus strives toward me now. The sleeping ones or the waking ones, I ask. Dreams, that is. You waste time, he hisses. But there's a difference. One I receive, one you construct. One arrives unbidden as sunlight on stone, the other crawls out of an advertising studio. One remains fresh even in memory, as if still speaking years later. The other gets passed around like a playing card, edges worn, smudged with once, then cleaned up again, painted a new color by aforementioned advertising studio, which is the ego. You know that, don't you? Which do you own? I ask. He looks over my head. Apparently, he says, you don't see the armies behind you. They run towards me. I look into his eyes, the floating white water-glazed globes. Apparently, you haven't noticed the shape of our home and everything on it. They will pass you and then pass us both again. Round earth, round life, with exactly no place to race to. And when the people realize they are racing nowhere while you take everything, then what? By the way, what is the strange pleasure you get cheating life of time? He returns his gaze to Mars, icy radioactive Mars. See you in the breadline, he mutters. Not if I see you first. 2. Begging to be remembered, efficiency sits on a curb that's slowly being overtaken by moss and the star-shaped purple flowers that grow in the moss. Watching the people walking by, he grimaces as they choose the slowest, most meandering routes. A father and son come along. He looks up at the man. You gonna raise the boy lazy like everyone else around here? Son looks up at his father. Father looks down on the old man. For 200 lineages you divided us, separated us on your tracks. Our common growing years, our best daylight hours together, fed to productivity. Next to life there is time, and for centuries you took it. But my grandmother was among the ones who figured it out, found the language trails through your spells. And my father peace stormed with a water leak. He swept his arm in a gesture of abundance. All this plump soil, flowing moisture, rising green will make a good grave for you. You will finally rest, and we will finally live. That's what I want to do to efficiency. Okay, so this is the poem I wrote for this occasion, and it's 6 pages and meanders a little bit. And if at times it doesn't make sense, that's okay, because it's a serial poem, and it doesn't necessarily need to have a very clear linear narrative. It's called Peace of Nature, Nature of Peace. 1. Peace of nature, nature of peace, and at the center of each, the same silent diamond. At the center of the diamond, time perhaps, or maybe merely the peace at the center of all origination. That which can't be seen, only enacted. The autumn park at dawn enacting it. The cloud dissolving behind, performing it. The ritual disintegration out of which each thing and moment blooms. Somehow we all know the invisible world is at peace. Meaning, attraction, language, beauty, that which speaks from the dry shell held in the hands to the sea brine eyes floating in the skull. Where outside meets inside, the slow trading of places. Piece of words on a page, piece of laying words on a page, piece of their meaning enlarging through time, and of the broom leaning in the corner, and the light brightening then dimming through the curtain. Piece of a heron settling time with his gaze. Piece of an eagle banking circles against sky, looking down through its death-spread wings. Peaceful the fields below, peaceful even the eyes of mice. 2. All falls toward level. All that falling is peace. Movement seeks rest, rest seeds movement. Peace is the mountain inside the major chord. All the little creeks flowing down, brook trout holding against the current with the grace and detachment of geologic strata. Peace is always the wish. Where light shines on the aluminum water bottle, peace is in the gleam. In daylight, vertical trails down through the window skinned in mist. Bonds of water, hands reaching and releasing for each drop, the way is made by other drops. Peace of falling into those hands. The cream-colored coffee mug rings a scent. Over its vessel curve, a drop has slid and dried into a slender snake of glaze. Darker at its edges, lighter in the middle, like cellophane. Somewhere in the fade, peace is sleeping or roaring. Maybe a ceramic mug is intensely a ceramic mug, wholly devoted to its atoms, a storm of presence at peace. A microscope sitting in a laboratory is not at peace, but caught in transition, defiant even of its own metals. Rows lined up on a shelf in the high school biology lab. Our mission to ensure that no young person ever be part of it, merely satisfied with life as it is. Better they suspect even the edges of peace. Better they cut it open and look inside. And so we rob them of their own mountains. Psychologists, therefore, nearly as secure as undertakers. No one to blame. We are simply in it, upgrade stuck, trying to piece together the severed threads, some thought or inner fragment of mood remembered from when the cloth was whole and held us. 3. What did you do? What didn't you do? What jagged branch sticks out of the sack you drag behind you? Can a poem give permission? Can the wind? Can a shell held in the hand? Can bird song coming in from indeterminate directions? Can a salmon scaling a waterfall? Can a mothering cedar, a doddering creek? The hawk crowning a snag seems to demand it. The sharpened gaze, talons, and beak cut the tethers and say fiercely, now. In any case, only shamans can change the speed and direction of time. And like a hawk, time hunts in peace. We move through its sights, neither forward or backward, but only deeper in can we go, and deeper still into the present. 4. The runner is at peace. The blues man, high up the neck, string bending tears out of a Stratocaster, is at peace. The weaver, the potter, the piano tuner, the carpenter, the window washer, the tailor, anyone with a simple physical task finds the pace that is peace. And there deepens the track. Unless pulled into production by the violence of efficiency, the capitalist with his hook, come along now, we're heading to the cutting edge, like it were a war front. The economy is a war front, and everything is losing. Peace is a very, very old sprawl of roots, and the feeling gained sitting upon them. Look up into the branches, the pattern is there, branching fractals, pure utterance. Photosynthesis, the drinking by a leaf of light, piece on piece, uncountable enactments. Growth, the flow of sugars down the sap tunnels, mineral-laden water rising, all directions expanding, becoming a constellation, a city of peace, at peace, growing it, giving it, inhaling and exhaling it, the holy round, home into home. Horizon to horizon, the rain falls. The ocean is above us now, and the waters of the body listen. Peace is the emptying cloud, the fallen and falling water. Later, the fields are lensed with sky mirrors, indeterminate depths shining. And that is that. Thank you, everyone. Hope you enjoyed.
So here's where we start the Q&A. First of all, Rob, it's so nice to hear your work again. It's just so beautiful to hear you. I was really getting a sense, and I hadn't noticed this before, and it may not be intentional, but I was really getting a sense of Robinson Jeffers as I listened to you. And in many ways considered the first real West Coast poet, a person who created his own place, including Hawk's Towers. So when the Hawk came up again, I was thinking there's a Jefferson, a Jeffers-like reference, because he had a place called Hawk's Tower in his spread. When you go up there, you see what his property was, because he planted this ring of trees around a block or 2 block area, and you can see the demarcation and how civilization came up up to that, and for financial reasons had to sell off much of what he had. But he was a poet who really believed that Western civilization ended on the west coast of North America, and so it's very clear, and I think many people have recognized this, that those of us on the west coast look to Asia more so than we look back to Europe. So we're facing that way. And he was very critical, obviously, of wars. And his own publisher had to put a disclaimer on his book.
Hmm. Yeah,
So I don't know if you've read Jeffers, but it seems to
I've
me
read
that
everything, just about everything he's written. I actually had a book of his prose or of his letters, big fatty, found in a used bookstore, and I didn't buy it, which I just still regret. But I've read all of his poems. Yeah, he's one of my favorite poets, and he has a very particular voice. And if it crept into my poems, I don't mind at all. But it's not a voice to try too hard to copy, because he was such a severe individual in terms of what he is willing to tolerate in human beings, and a little bit antisocial in ways. So, but I appreciate that. And I've been to his Hawks Tower, kind of made a pilgrimage there. Um, really sad, just all the, there's this beautiful hand-built home and tower, and it's just surrounded by subdivision, and it's hard to see. But yeah, he's a real example for all of us in his devotion to poetry.
that's great confirmation. I'm going to open it up to Q&A. I just want to say that when we create a Poems for Peace, both Adelia and I are looking for something that fits the bill, that obviously is directed toward a peaceful effort, but goes beyond rhetoric, which is very difficult to do when you're talking about a specific subject. So I thought you handled it very well, and grateful that there's a little bit of an angle which you took and gave us real poetry rather than rhetoric. So when you're talking about nature, it's very clear that you go out and you watch and you pay attention, and it really takes an effort to be able to do that. Of course, just witnessing what's happening is an important act of peace. How in my bay here, where I look out on Lake Washington, and have not seen the coots here as much during coot season as much as I see seagulls. And right now there's probably about 70 seagulls out there. And I'm wondering if the coots are like, look, if the seagulls are there, we're out of here. But the fact that coots hang out on rafts, not on literal rafts, they call a group of coots a raft. How these are like little cities of coots, and how I can, apply the things that you see in nature to my own experience as I look out the window right now is a beautiful bit of symmetry. So Adelia asks, could Rob speak to how his essays complement his poetry, and also the time he's been taking to study ecology and how that is nurturing / affecting his work?
Yeah, thanks, Adelia. Um, yeah, essays and poetry are, two different forms, and I've moved to essays when I want to explain things in more detail, or when I have a political edge I really want to put in there, because I think essays can handle that better. But what's really been interesting for me in the last 8 months or so is that as I learn about ecology and really start to understand the science of it, I more and more shift to poetry than essay. Um, there are just some things you can't say unless you do it in a poem. And that's what I'm finding. In some ways, poetry is the more flexible medium, um, but it's difficult. Scientific principles aren't easy to explain in a poem. And I have a number of essays I'm working on, but I've been just surprised and in some ways delighted to find myself turning back again and again to poetry. And I think there's something needing to be said right now in all areas of life, that maybe poetry is the best outlet for. There's so much information in the world. There's so much data, and there are so many experts, and there are so many opinions. And to not get lost in that soup is really hard. And sometimes I feel like poetry is the thing that can cut through, that can ring the bell, that might make all the white noise stop, or to it, like, you know, dropping a glass in a party. So yeah, I love the question, because it's, I think, something a lot of people struggle with, you know, which form to use for which idea. Yeah, I'm just finding poetry to be where I always keep ending up these days.
Ideally, I would just encourage you to continue your line of questioning rather than have me read your words in the chat and ask Rob.
Oh, I get to unmute. I wasn't sure. I was wondering how Andrew was doing this. Yeah. Just to say, I don't know if there's an answer to this, but somehow poetry seems to subvert the voice of uber rationality, of efficiency. And I'm not sure how it does that, except that it's springing more from something musical and deep and timeless within us. But I wondered what your thoughts were on that, because you're choosing that form for that.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah. Well, science is uber rationality, and science requires everybody to make certain agreements about what will be said and won't be said. You know, what is considered science and isn't science. And you know, when you write a poem, you don't check with anybody on anything. So I think poetry may be also the way we each find our own voice that doesn't fall into that trap of rationality. I just on Facebook, which I should not spend time on, but I do. I shared this post where someone was saying, you know, do you really want to, you know, do you trust science when science is involved in all kinds of mass torture of animals with scientific experimentation, pesticides, the nuclear bomb? You know, this meme, we should all trust science. And I don't trust science. I don't think it makes sense to trust science. You know, we can use science, but I was surprised when I shared that, just how many of my liberal friends were really insulted by that concept of not trusting science. And yeah, so we're kind of caught in this media meme of how we're all supposed to be, and poetry somehow is, you know, a refuge still from a lot of that.
Here's where Anne Graham Walker comes in and talks about Rupert Sheldrake and the dogma of scientists, the materialist dogma of what he would call scientism.
Yes.
But I'm not going to put words in her mouth. She's got to check out. So Anne, I would like if you articulated what you wrote in the chat to Rob, and perhaps engage a discussion about that for a minute or two.
Yeah, well, can you read what I wrote in the chat? You got it there?
Yeah. I was impressed.
And then I'll pick up on that.
I was impressed more and more and calmed by the places where you found peace in this broken world, detail after detail of peace, deep in a conscious universe.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Rupert Sheldrake, of course, believes profoundly in the conscious universe and in the stones and those trees and those leaves and things where you're finding reflection and peace. And I think that poets are drawn to those things for through a kind of a mutual empathy, you know, um,
Maybe they're drawn to us. Who knows? Maybe they see us
or they're
coming.
drawn to us. They see us coming. I don't know. I mean, I go walking in the woods, and when I'm there, I just do feel this kind of sense of life all around me, not just, you know, not just trees and rocks. And I can't put it into words, Paul, but it does feel like a conscious universe to me. And you know, it's hard to find words for peace, certainly in the human world, but I think I do better in the forest. Yeah.
Well, I think
That's
it's a
great.
very interesting perception that, you know, one can talk about peace and give someone else your beliefs about peace or rhetoric about peace, or you could write a poem that allows you to have the experience of peace. And to me, that would be the harder thing to do, and yet ultimately the more satisfying thing to do, which is
Yeah.
why you know, thanks to Canadian poet George Bowring, I'm he really made it clear that there's a difference between poetry and rhetoric. And I think that many people don't understand the difference. They want the poem to be something they understand. They want an anthology of poems for peace to be things that they can agree with rather than necessarily experiences of peace like Rob allowed us to have, and which I think is becoming a more rare skill to have that, because I think the voice of the rhetoricians is gaining steam from not just from the right, which we would expect it from, but from the left as well. I also found interesting that Rob found this assignment to read as part of a Poems for Peace series, a good assignment to write a poem. And I'd like you to talk maybe a little bit more about that, Rob. Yeah, just the notion that here you are going to read for Poems for Peace and you get inspired to write something specifically, which is the same thing that happened to me, because I'm hoping to be the reader in February if it meets Adelia and Andrew's approval, and kind of how that created the vibe in you to be able to write something.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of when I made the decision to write a serial poem. I don't think I made a decision to write a serial poem. I think learning how to write serial poems from you, Paul, kind of prepared me to be ready um, for whatever came up, and something did start coming up. Something did start to come up, and I realized, oh, well, I don't have to finish this, and I don't have to get this right. I've got 3 to 4 weeks. I can play with this. And in some ways, it was a very practical form for me because I could kind of let go into it and not stress out about whether I'm going to, you know, write enough poems for the reading. And it was fun. I really enjoyed it. And you know, peace is something we don't think about a lot anymore. I mean, it does have this aged quality, which is tragic. You know, that it's a 60s thing or something, and it's not. It's ancient. You know, in doing this exercise of writing this poem, I basically came to the conclusion that peace is perhaps the goal of all living things. You know, you look at the lion after the kill is resting, and you know, the gazelle and the herd, they're all at peace, peacefully eating, and there is struggle in existence, but the point of the struggle seems to be so we can relax and be at peace and actually just experience what is, you know, what the universe is. And it may be the universe is ultimately at peace too. But there's something about the nature of matter that has peace inside it that is available for all of us if we will form relationship with things and beings. There's a line by Ceylon. He says, those who describe things in detail, or those who go into detail, are on the side of things. And what he's saying is, you know, by noticing things, you bring them into your own universe, and you give them the full stature that they deserve. You know, even something as simple as a doorknob or whatever. And if you really will let yourself see into things, you'll find that there's a piece just sitting there waiting for you. If that answers your question.
Go ahead, Halima.
Halima.
Hi.
Hi.
Hi, Rob. Thank you so much for this reading.
Mhm.
I just wanted to just, I don't have anything deep to say, but I just wanted to share with you the lines that I bothered to write
Okay.
down, and they were really images that were very helpful. So in that, I think the first poem you read, you said something like, I don't need to know the purpose of my life, but I do need to know all of the details. Is that right? Is that a line
I need
you
to
wrote?
live the details. I need to
Yeah.
live the details.
No, I don't think you said live. I think you said no. Well, you know better than what you know, but anyway.
It's written down somewhere. And
Anyway,
you know,
I
it's
thought-
kind of the same thing, right?
Yeah, exactly. And just like there's an image of sunlight on stone, which I loved. And, you know, and then I like the idea of you writing the poem, The Peace of Nature and the Nature of Peace. There's a little wordplay, but in a way it works, you know?
They kind of seem like the same thing, like the nature of peace is the peace you find in nature, something like that.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I don't know why I wrote this. So peaceful, even the eyes of mice. Remember that one? That line is very nice. And peace in the gleam. These are kind of images that I, you know, until you said them, I thought, oh yes, that's right. One of the lines I liked, and I don't think I got it written down properly, was something about the ceramic mug just sort of being itself. That was, I thought that was a good image of peace. And then a line where you said, I'm going deeper still into the present to find peace. I think that's really true. And really true.
Yeah.
And anyway, thank you so much. These images are beautiful and they're very original. I think, don't you think? He's very original. And I didn't feel anything was cliched. You know, when you get into peace,
You're right.
one of the big
Yes, you
things, and you know, when I try sometimes to write about peace or something, you can just fall into the trap of cliche very easily because a lot has been written about it, but you managed to avoid it, and it was some very beautiful images. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Halima, some great points. First of all, that line that you noted, I was going to write down, so I'm glad you did that for me.
Which
I love the not about knowing the detail. What was it about? Is it about the details of one's life, and is to have to live the details of one's life. To me, I was going to write that down. There was a line before that in that same poem about a distinguished wake, which I thought was fantastic.
Yeah.
And I'll never forget that. You know, that's the kind of line, so original, I'll never forget. Before I forget, Halima, your lighting is fantastic. Whatever you're doing with the lighting, you should keep doing that because it's a very good effect.
Be a lighting consultant.
Also, your point, Halima, about Rob being original. Rob is really and truly an outsider poet. He doesn't have a degree. He is self-taught, and I think that that's a tradition that in this country has really been forgotten or ignored. And you can look at all the outsiders in the history of poetry, and I would include in them William Blake and Emily Dickinson and Bob Kaufman and Wanda Coleman, and you can go on and on. And there is something to be said about a person who comes to poetry in that way, and it's important to have that voice. And Rob certainly exemplifies that. And
that's very interesting. Very interesting.
Excellent point that you brought up. Bob Kaufman, by the way, opened in Subwood and was a black beat poet in San Francisco who went through some severe struggles, including electroshock therapy. And the story of his death seems to be very much influenced by Subwood. And there was an article you can Google the SICA USA website to find out a little bit more about Bob Kaufman and his connection with Subwood. Are there any other questions for Rob? Comments, rebuttals? Go ahead, Diana.
So thanks very much for the poetry.
Mhm.
Much appreciated it. And I'll order your book.
Oh, okay.
I just wanted to comment that the way you wrote about that made me realize how much we fall in love with our tools. And that even in the
Yeah.
abstract, knowledge, science, computers, electricity, we just get so jazzed by these wonderful toys and tools, and they make us happy monkeys. But it doesn't. But anyway, you wrote without bringing any of that into it, which is that's really refreshing.
Yeah, and I usually do write about a lot of the bad stuff that is going on, so it was fun not to.
Well, we think analysis is going to improve things too, and that will somehow, and it actually flies in the face of, if you're part of a web of life, that would, and you really believe that and live that way, you would live differently than we do. So
Yeah, I've been thinking of indigenous speaking as we've been talking, and how indigenous people have a way of just cutting through analysis, because they don't do the analysis and then decide they understand. They just understand because they've been listening to life for so long. And maybe that's a little bit like what poetry is too. Poetry allows us to think along those lines rather than the lines of analysis. That might be a stretch, I don't know, but I do sometimes feel like there's something similar in what poets do, and just the way indigenous people seem to talk and think about the world.
I love that, Diana, that this notion of our attachment to tools. Jason Worth, a friend of ours, says that as a Buddhist, he can't do any vacuuming because Buddhists don't have any attachments. So I think about that. I also think about the line that Rob said about indigenous people speaking, and I'm reminded of the story of daylight savings time. And I quickly Googled it, and the story was when told the reason for daylight savings time, the old Indian said only the government would believe that you can cut a foot off the top of a blanket, sew it to the bottom, and get a longer blanket. So that might be an illustration. Plus the fact that I hate
Yeah.
daylight savings time and wish it would go away, and figuring Biden would do that first thing in office, and he hasn't. And I'm extremely disappointed because of that. But indigenous thinking, there is so much to learn from indigenous people. And
Yeah.
I speak from the ancestral homeland of the Duwamish tribe, which is not even actually was recognized by the federal government for a time, and then had that taken away. And yet here we are in maybe the largest town in North America named after an indigenous person, and we don't even
Right.
recognize his tribe. So there's much that we can learn from indigenous people and indigenous lifeways, and I hope that gains a lot more steam. We're getting close to our hour time limit, I think. Not that we have to end at 60 minutes, but if anyone else has a burning question or comment or compliment for Rob, please unmute and let it rip. Otherwise, I'm going to thank Adelia McWilliam, the chair of SICA Canada, the Subud International Cultural Association, and thank my board members at SICA USA for allowing me to be part of this project and for sanctioning it. SICA-USA.org is our website. I'm going to then turn it over to Adelia and Andrew to wrap this up, and maybe Rob with a last comment. Adelia.
Just quickly to say thank you again so much, Rob. It raised so many questions for me, and I know that Anne Graham Walker was asking for copies of the poems, so we'll have to talk about that.
Okay. Okay.
And then the other thing, just to say that to everybody who's here and to pass it on, that Sharon Thiessen has agreed to read for us in January, which is lovely. And again, she said, but should I bring in poems about peace by other poets? And I was like, no, just your work, please.
Yeah.
And because I believe that just the act of writing poetry brings peace, just to being engaged in that ahimsa, no harm being done. So just to say thank you so much again, and Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Andrew, for recording this and all the work that you do.
Rob, any last thoughts before we go?
I just want to thank you all for coming, and I really enjoyed reading for you. It's been just a really pleasant, enjoyable hour. The only thought that came to my mind while we were reading is a line that came to my head a long time ago. We're drowning in complex analysis and starving for a few clear words. And hopefully we got a few today.
Thanks, Rob. Thanks for being here. Andrew, thanks for all your great work. And Adelia, always a pleasure to work with you.
Great. Take care, guys.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye,
And see you
everyone. Thanks for coming.